Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis of how it impacts your school community. Yesterday, the governor announced that he was lifting the vaccine or test public health order. We'll talk about that today and what is the impact for your school district.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it is just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with ACSA's Executive Director, Dr. Edgar Zazueta. I'm Alikhan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you with us. Go ahead and jump onto the chat, say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today. Robert Adams, first one on the chat today. Welcome to you, Robert. Edgar, how are you?
It's a Wednesday. I'm here with you, Naj. Only a few other places I'd rather be, but for the most part, it's a good Wednesday thus far.
It is. Yeah, it is a good Wednesday. We've got a big show for you coming up. We know that the governor released the information that the vaccinate or test public health order would come to an end this coming weekend. We've got Zazueta Kaminsky from ACSA's Governmental Relations Department coming up on the show to go through the successes and challenges of it and take your questions as well. Edgar, I will ask you, because we were here in the office when we found out it was going to take place. Are you surprised by anything? Did anything stand out for you?
No, it was just a matter of time, right? I mean, I almost have to joke. It's like, well, what are people going to ask us about now? Because this was by far the most popular question we would get, not only on the lunch break, in our superintendent's meetings, and some of our other different forums. Literally, this is the running joke that we could not go to a meeting without somebody asking about this provision. And as we've been foreshadowing for some time, I think it was a matter of when, not if, that they were going to change. And I'm not gonna steal Zazueta's thunder, but I know one of the pieces that she had been talking to us about is obviously this the correlation to the CDC and as they changed the rules. So I think it was kind of when we got the call from the governor's office letting us know that this is going to happen. Our friends in the governor's office almost joke, well, you could almost assume what this is going to be. I was like, all right, about time. Been waiting for this. So yeah, I think it was well deserved, and we'll get into some of the politics about it because I actually think we've been advocating on this front. We've been obviously we've been pushing the administration not to fly in the face of like what our organization actually felt about vaccinations. I think we were also go back however many years ago to that spring of 2020, later in that year when we're having a vaccine conversation. I mean, we were one of the organizations that were pushing not for mandates per se, but to make sure that our educators had priority to those vaccines. Now we're in a very different place. And as I know Zazueta's going to talk about, I think for us, it was following the science and making sure that there was that there was alignment around what the federal government was advising. And frankly, the frank reality that our communities were facing. I think that throughout the pandemic, our vantage point has really been about implementation and how the different rules impact our members. And I think that's what really pushed us to go in the direction that we did on this one.
Yeah. And Zazueta will join us in a couple of minutes. I'm interested to ask her what comes next. Now that this domino has fallen, what comes next? So Zazueta will join us in a couple of minutes. Want to say hello to Tammy Beal, William Redford with us, Amy Wynn Hernandez with us, Gail Olson, Molly Large. I am seeing a good list there. Marie Russell over at Turlock Unified. So good to have you guys with us here on the show. A couple of news headlines that I want to just pass along. Sending our best wishes out to our educators, our students, our school communities who are impacted right now by wildfires. There was a story, Edgar, last week in EdSource that reported 90,000 students have been impacted by wildfires. Again, that is as of last week, as reported by EdSource, the largest in Riverside County. 66,000 students impacted there. We know that there are wildfires happening all over the place, Edgar. We know that the mosquito fire is happening here in Northern California that's impacting us and students in this region. So we wish all of them the best. I want to shift really quickly to a story that also came out earlier this week. A federal grant program to help recruit and train California teachers. 3 California teacher preparation programs will share in the $25.8 million of federal funding to recruit, prepare, and retain teachers. Now, the money that's coming here to California is much smaller than that $25 million in federal grant money. National University receiving $1.96 million, Alder Graduate School $1.31 million, Reach University $1.35 million. This is funding for teacher preparation programs in high-need communities and teaching residency programs for individuals who are new to teaching. Edgar, we have look, we never really stopped talking about the educator shortage. It is nice to know that there is some federal money on the way for the teaching of these programs, but hopefully this will not be the last time that we see the federal government funding these types of programs to get educators in the classroom.
Yeah, I know. I think you hit it on the head, Naj. Before, let me just say, obviously, on the first topic, just wish our best to those folks impacted up here in Northern California and down in my relative neck of the woods in Hemet and other communities around there that are being impacted by the fire down there. I know a lot of schools, districts had to close their schools, if not for the fire, for the air quality. And I know this was the case down in Riverside County. And also folks up in the Tahoe region, in the foothills, to be more exact, there in terms of just the impacts. Unfortunately, it's deja vu, right? It almost feels like this is now an annual occurrence where we're having this conversation, but it's kind of the age we live in, especially here in California. As part as the pipeline issue, the teacher issue, you're right. I mean, yeah, and it's always good to see some headlines about resources being dedicated to one program or another. As we've talked a lot about, and Surratt, who's on here talking about a different issue today, but she kind of helps us on this front too, in terms of thinking about our pipeline issues. And I think we all agree that this is really going to have to be a systemic effort in terms of putting some spotlight, not just on teachers, but also with classified employees. One thing that we're worried about is obviously that pipeline to our site administrators and other leaders. I think all the help that we can get helps is going to hopefully move the needle a little bit. I know there's been a lot of conversations, this recurring issues that come out, even in addition to growing the pipeline. It's how can we utilize folks that come maybe from other states, the reciprocity issues. It's a multifaceted, right? Not to mention, I know the state and others have at least thought about, should we be putting a bigger spotlight on the need for educators? A health for all type marketing campaign, if you will, that like we're really targeting communities, targeting young people to really tout the benefits of going down this career path. But yeah, to your point, a lot more to do on that front. And frankly, I think as we get a little bit further away from the pandemic worst, I think this is going to come back into spotlight, just because this is not just a pandemic related issue. This was things that we were talking about even before COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, before we shift topics here, I want to just point out our great board member, Gina Lynch over in Region 4, saying hello to us in the chat, also saying great to see your faces. Okay, now it has been a long-standing joke here on the Legislative Lunch Break about how old my headshot is. For those of you who have not been part of the joke, it is more than 10 years old. So last week when we were off from the show on Thursday, Edgar and I had a trip to the photographer, and we'll pop up some of the photos. Now there's Edgar, right? Edgar does have a more recent photo, but there's Edgar getting his shot taken. Now, mine was much more uncomfortable because I was having to contort my body into different positions that I'm not used to. But this photo right here, Edgar, is the funniest one, because it's almost like this would be the one. And I'm almost disappointed that Neri Pais is not on the chat today, because it would seem like he would want this one to be the 8x10 glossy. The funny part of this, folks, was that as you and I were standing next to each other, and we literally did this just for fun, the photographer kept telling you and I, get closer, get closer, get those heads closer. It was almost like she was hoping to knock our heads together like we were from the Three Stooges or something.
The photographer didn't know that we don't interact aside from us being on camera, in different rooms. So, having us that proximity was a challenge.
Yeah.
But hey, and people are calling it out. What you gave away your biggest secret last week, Naj.
Right.
Here, you're always the one suited up. You never see Naj without a tie. As you could see in that picture, he was sporting the jeans and his Nike kicks there. Mm-hmm. So, we won't call you out for wearing your shorts to work today here,
right?
With your with your sports coat and jacket. But yeah, the running joke last week as we got there and we had to do our individual ones, given that we're both soccer coaches, I was like, it almost feels like we need to take a buddy picture here. And it became a big joke, and our team got a kick out of that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm waiting for some of our loyal viewers to say, hey, you guys got to bring those 8x10s over to Leadership Summit so you guys can autograph them. So anyway, wanted to make sure all of you got a chance to see that. All right, let's go ahead and switch to our topic today. As you know, the governor lifted the vaccinate or test public health order yesterday. That will go into effect on Saturday. Surratt Kaminsky, ACSA legislative advocate. She's been focused on this topic for some time now. She joins us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Surratt, welcome. I just want to dive in at the start into the details. The order is lifted officially. It goes into effect Saturday. What do our viewers need to know as of right now as we move towards the weekend?
Great. Thanks for having me on, you guys. Essentially everything in the public health order from August of last year has fallen away. So schools will no longer be required to administer weekly COVID-19 testing for the unvaccinated or under-vaccinated workers, and there's no need to verify the vaccine status of all workers. The CDPH director and state public health officer, Dr. Tomas Aragon, he said that weekly testing of the unvaccinated groups is no longer slowing the spread as it did earlier in the pandemic due to Omicron being more infectious. State officials, they still stress that there's the need for increased vaccination rates. That's an important tool to protect people from serious illness. He also stressed that employers and schools are encouraged to continue providing testing resources to staff and students, that will help slow the spread of COVID-19 in all communities. And that these two, vaccination and testing, are two key measures that help mitigate the spread. The states distributed another round of 10 million at-home test kits to schools, and they're going to continue to support testing resources for schools.
Surratt, first of all, let me take the opportunity to thank you. I know you've been a lifeline there for us and for our members in terms of just the changing rules going way back, right? And I joke about not a meeting goes by where we didn't get asked this question. Well, you're the one in the trenches every week, meeting with the CDPH officials, listening to their, conference calls, getting in there and, in the most delicate way, being a thorn in their side, right? Continuing to ask the questions of when we would see updates. So just thank you for that. So maybe let's take a step back. How did we get here? We talked about this whole issue of the hearings, the discussions, the changes with the CDC, like big picture, what do you think finally changed and why has the state finally moved to go in a different direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. Schools aren't the only sector that's affected by these public health orders, obviously. There were many other sectors that the state had to consider in lifting the mandate. So maybe that's why there was a bit of a lag after the CDC came out with their difference in guidelines. There's a question here in the chat. Yes, it's true. There are employees in healthcare, correctional health, and adult residential settings where the mandate does remain in effect. So yes, Dr. Williams, you are correct about correctional facilities. They still have the mandate. What we've seen throughout the pandemic and as each day has passed, we learn more and more about COVID-19 and the different variants. And as I alluded to earlier, CDC in early August, they came out with guidance specifically about Omicron and the strain and its differences to Delta and the older variants, and that it spreads regardless of vaccination status. And then the CDC guidance for schools, which also came out in early August, they're saying that it didn't recommend routine testing, or if there is routine testing, that there will actually be no distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated staff. So as you said at the top of the show, Edgar, it really was a matter of when and not if the mandate would be lifted.
Want to remind you folks, if you have questions for Saret on the lifting of the public health order, go ahead and put those into the chat. Ryan, I see your question there, and we want to make sure that we get a little bit more information and look that up before we give you an answer. So we'll try and address that. But again, if you have questions for Saret, go ahead and put those into the chat. Saret, as Edgar mentioned, you've been monitoring this discussion and all of the back and forth. And of course, the administration met privately with some of our ACSA members and took in some of their feedback. Generally, what has been the role that ACSA has played in getting to this point where we could lift that public health order?
Yeah. So, I mean, as Edgar said, ACSA has always led with and has always advocated first and foremost for the safety of our students and staff. And to their credit, the administration has been really good about working closely with ACSA from the very beginning of the pandemic. I mean, recall in the very beginning, the conversation was about, well, when we get the vaccine doses, who's going to be first in line? The state started this community vaccine advisory committee member group, and it was over 70 members in all sectors. ACSA was one of 2 education partners that was on this broad committee. I mean, so ACSA from the start has had its voice, it's been in the mix. When it's come to any change in the guidance, the administration's always been willing to meet with us, hear about any of our implementation hurdles, always help with FAQ resources and office hours for LEA staff. That has really helped streamline the effort, so kudos to them. On this public health order in particular, as you said, the administration met with our superintendents and really had a lengthy discussion about the realities of the messaging on the weekly testing when Omicron was again infecting vaccinated and fully boosted employees. And this was a Thursday meeting. And that morning, the press was already leaking info that on Friday, there was going to be this new CDC guidance release, and that the CDC guidance was going to recommend no longer routine testing. And if there was, no distinction between the vaccinated and unvaccinated staff. So it really was like a perfect storm of the timing. And just to say really clearly, our advocacy has never been political. Our membership is very diverse throughout the state. And we've always just advocated for the safety of our students and staff and for alignment of the latest guidance. And so in this instance, the guidance said that weekly testing was no longer recommended.
That's right. And you just touched on it. And I appreciate that context, right? Because I think it's, again, not to beat a dead horse, but I think where we went is kind of what we were seeing in the field, what we were hearing. And again, this is coming from members who at the beginning of this, we were pushing as hard. Let's get as many of our folks vaccinated. Right now, whether that requirement still made sense in the context of a bunch of other changes, I think that you put it nicely. But it does also give us a chance to talk about the public messaging from CDPH. While they're saying no more mandate, that's still not required, they're still very much encouraging folks to continue to get vaccinated, right? And you just touched on this, but from our member standpoint, why do you believe this became such a pivotal issue? Why was it that we heard about this almost every single week on here and on some other venues?
Well, I mean, the testing is still really important, right? So what we've seen throughout the pandemic is that we have the multiple mitigation factors that help keep us safe from infection and from spreading the virus. And so I believe it was in February, the governor released the SMARTER plan, and that's to help us move to the next endemic stage of the virus. And so what does that mean? SMARTER is an acronym. So S is for shots for the vaccines, the M is for masking, A is for awareness for the communications and engaging communities on the mitigation measures. The R is readiness, which will include surveillance and surge staffing in case there's more variants that are coming. T is the testing, and that is not just routine testing as we saw, but also the capacity to test in commercial and public health capacity statewide. The E in the SMARTER plan is education, expanding the vaccination rates among kids. That's going to continue to be a priority for the state. And the R is RX for therapeutics, maximizing the order for the most clinically effective therapeutics available out there. So, again, CDPH is still going to be encouraging that, schools and LEAs work closely with the state to help in the Smarter Plan, which include all of these aspects.
Saret, there's a question in our chat from Joel Garcia, and it kind of adds to this last question that I was going to ask you. Joel asks, do you know how OSHA is weighing in on this? I guess my question to you would be, I think our members would be interested in knowing what is next. What is that next domino to fall related to state guidelines? What can we tell everybody is kind of next? And then also talking about Joel's question about OSHA.
Yeah, for sure. And props to my colleague, Dorothy Johnson, who is just right there in the thick of all the Cal OSHA conversations. And I know Cal OSHA is having a meeting tomorrow that she'll be on and has been doing some advocacy on. So what does Cal OSHA and that advocacy look like? Right now, they have the temporary emergency standards. So this is guidance for all workplaces, and this is in place until December 31 of this year. So those don't change with the recent announcement, for this teacher, tester, vaccinate rules. So Cal OSHA rules include the rules for distancing, for cleaning protocols, notification of infection, and close contact notices to employees. The emergency temporary standards with Cal OSHA, they don't include vaccination requirements for employees. And in fact, many of the most recent updates that they've included language that say regardless of vaccination status. So Cal OSHA aside, I'd say that the next challenge is how the pandemic and the variants continue to evolve, especially as we move into cold and flu season. The state has been very clear, and it takes all aspects of the Smarter Plan to keep folks safe. And sometimes that means dialing up and dialing down the mitigation strategies. The other piece to consider is that local health jurisdictions can be more strict than the state in their guidance. So that can pose a challenge when messaging to the local community. And just our folks have been great about messaging grace, maintaining a respectful community, knowing that there's different comfort levels with families and how they approach masking, for example, and just to have grace with each other in our communities.
Hey, Saret, before we let you go, I have to ask you this question. I only bring that up because since Edgar became our executive director and not just our senior director of policy and governmental relations, I've had to put a piece of paper here that has executive director written on it and just put that right next to the camera, just in case. You gave us that acronym. Lord knows everything in this state with government or public education is an acronym. How many times did you have to practice that acronym for Smarter? Because you just nailed that right off the top.
I have a little cheat sheet here.
See,
she was good about not looking at it. And let me touch on just one short thing, and Saret can react if she wants. I mean, one of the things that sticks out in conversations we've had with the administration or with CDPH is that they were calling this year a transitionary year, right? And I think one of the takeaways that I've been hearing from our members as we get to go to talk to folks around the state or virtually as we're connecting is that there had been a little bit of that newfound optimism. Not to say that there's not challenges. I mean, we're talking about the challenges at the beginning of the show, staffing shortages, building capacity and all these ambitious initiatives. But generally speaking, that things are different at the beginning of this school year than where we were a year ago with the Omicron wave, Delta at that time, and also all the rules, right? So I think this is a positive sign that hopefully this overarching message of really getting our folks to be back to the focus of teaching and learning, for our site administrators to really try to be instructional leaders there instead of public health workers, which essentially was part of the gig. So yeah, and I appreciate that, Saret, in terms of just what's next and is there other pieces that we may see there on the end. So I appreciated that info.
Hey, Saret, we do have a question that's come in here from Scott Borba. I want to make sure I fit this one in. Scott asks, would the weekly testing mandate expiring this week, are there any conversations regarding testing in general? The majority of students and staff who have tested positive this year have felt better in 2 to 3 days, but have to stay out 5 to 10 days due to guidance. Have you heard anything about a changing dynamic with the numbers specifically?
No, I haven't heard that there's going to be any change on that aspect. The only thing that changed was just this public health mandate regarding the school employees. So I haven't heard any possible changes on that front. If you don't mind, I also see a question that came in from Sarah Smith, if you don't mind. Sarah Smith asked about anticipating an extension of the supplemental paid leave beyond September 22. And yes, we did want to just let you know that it was extended by 3 months until December 31.
All right, there you go. Saret Kaminsky, ACSA legislative advocate, member of our ACSA Governmental Relations Department. Saret, so good to have you here on the show. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
And folks, we want to give you just a little bit of a teaser about what's coming up over these next couple of months here. We've got ACSA Leadership Summit coming up first week of November down in San Diego. Going to be a great event. Here's a preview. That is November 3rd through 5th. We have a full preview of ACSA Leadership Summit coming up in the next edition of EdCal, which should be arriving in your mailboxes on Saturday. This is the one thing I can tell you as far as Leadership Summit is concerned that will attract all of you. Puppies. Just be prepared. There are puppies involved in this year's Leadership Summit. I mentioned EdCal. If you have stories coming up happening in your area, in your region, in your district, go ahead and send that information to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. Heather Williams, the great Heather Williams, who we had earlier with a question. Also want to remind you, ACSA Personnel Institute happening here in Sacramento, September 26th. Through 28th. So thank you, Heather, for that. Neri, of course, Edgar wanted to jump on before our show ended. Neri, I have to tell you that there is something that you are going to specifically love around, 8 minutes in, something like that, Edgar. So you're going to want to take a look at that. Go ahead and make sure to watch the replay. Edgar, before we go, any final thoughts on what the lifting of the public health order means from what Saret had to say?
Yeah, I think a reminder, and I always make this joke, like our job is to find all the things that the state government is not doing right, and it's an easy target, right? It's red meat for us to go and be critical. I do appreciate our friends in the governor's office that even when we disagree, I think more and more. And this is a testament to our members. I think this is a testament to our organization. It might not always be as quick as we want, but I think as Saret talked about, they are hearing those perspectives from the field. They're hearing from the folks who actually have to implement all the rules that are coming down from Sacramento. And I think they did. And privately, they acknowledged this. There was they had to navigate their whole system there. And I think some of the reasons that this took longer than what some folks would have wanted is, to Saret's point, this wasn't just about schools. This was actually public sector wide. Yeah. And I think that was some of the reasons why this got a bit delayed. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, they did hear the perspectives of our leaders and what was going on in the ground.
Yeah. All right, folks, we are here at the bottom of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.